All right, this week we are going to I am going to introduce you to your third and final unit of the semester. Guys, we are on the home stretch. And this unit really focuses on arguments and positions and research. And this is where English 112 is going to pick up. At least that's where my class picks up when I teach 112. But theoretically, all English 112 classes really focus on the development of arguments through research and the establishment of positions and things like that. So, what do you guys think of when you think about argument? I mean, we hear people say all the time, I got into an argument with so and so. I got into an argument with my parents. I got into an argument with my best friend. We see all around us on the news that there's some sort of argument, or especially in today's climate politically. I mean, there's always we hear that word all the time. We use that word all the time, and usually that phrase or that word argument is typically synonymous with this kind of idea of a heated debate over something controversial. There's an exchange of words, and there's that underlying implication of someone is right and someone is wrong. That's not necessarily the case of what an argument means in the academic world. Argument embodies multiple facets. In one sense, it's the exchange of ideas to have a conversation, which we'll talk about more in just a second. And if we look at it through that avenue, essentially all writing is some form of argument because writing is a conversation. Our views and our words are part of that conversation. And in some sense, you guys have been doing that unknowingly all semester long. We can look at argument as a defense of a position, but more importantly, argument is the presentation of a point of view with the aim of convincing people to agree or at least see the validity of that position or viewpoint. In a lot of ways, we look at issues or topics that may or may not be controversial. And when you hear argument, there's always that concern with, oh, I've got to convince them to be on my side. I've got to convince them to change their mind. And in a lot of ways, and in the realities of the world, especially with controversial issues where people have strong, steadfast beliefs, there's really no way that we can be persuaded to change or persuade others to change their deep rooted, steadfast beliefs. Instead, the goal becomes to argue that your position is valid whether or not the other person agrees. So essentially, okay, I may not agree with where you're coming from, but I understand your position, and while it's not right for me, it could be right for you. So in the academic world, with academic writing, it really values argument because it's seen as a type of communication. It's a way of opening a dialogue with others in order to engage with various ideas. And I want you guys to think back to the very beginning of this semester with the article that I asked you all to read, hashtag shame on you, where Kathleen Fitzpatrick's position or claim is that we should be open to the exchange of ideas, be open to this idea of having critical debates and not kind of shame the person who thinks those ideas, but be critical with the ideas themselves. This kind of communication, this sharing of research, the advancement of our own argument and purpose really propose new ways of thinking of a topic. And that's what I want you guys to keep in mind as we move through this unit. So the first thing that I want to kind of discuss is this kind of idea of opinion versus argument. Argument is often confused with opinion. I mean, how many times have you guys wrote, in my opinion, or I believe? And I've told you guys, or I've consistently said, you want to avoid using those types of phrases. And here's why. Because while opinion and argument both present claims we think are true, they're not necessarily the same. For example, in my opinion, everything should be purple because purple is a superior color. But that's not necessarily an argument, mainly because what separates opinion from argument are the two distinct differences. One is that argument has rules. To form an argument, you have to consider if it's reasonable. Is it reasonable that everything should be purple? Well, in my world it is, but not necessarily in the grand scheme of things. Is it worth making? Is it sound? Is it logical? Do all parts of the argument fit together? And we're going to talk more about rules and argument moving forward, but argument is contingent upon rules, and part of that has to do with its structure. Arguments are structured. There are key elements that every argument needs, and with opinions there are no rules. There is no structure. Anyone and everyone can assert an opinion with no need or basis of support. And support is the other key difference between an argument and opinion. And support for an argument has its own rules. It too needs to be logical, sufficient, and support can be found in the forms of statistics, of facts, of other voices of authority, and all of that comes through research. The kind of commonly confused idea is that arguments are also commonly mistaken for statements of fact. This comes out because often people privilege facts over opinion, even as they defend the right to have opinions. In other words, facts are good and opinions are bad, or if not exactly bad, then fuzzy and thus easy to reject. However, remember the important distinction between an argument and opinion stated above. While argument may sound like an opinion, the two are not the same. An opinion is an assertion, but it's left to stand alone with little to no reasoning or support. An argument is much stronger because it includes and demonstrates reasons and supports for its claim. As for mistaking a fact for an argument, keep this important distinction in mind. Sorry, I forgot to switch the slides. You want to keep this important distinction in mind. An argument must be arguable. In everyday life, arguable is often a synonym for doubtful. For an argument, though, arguable means that it's worth arguing, that it has a range of possible answers, angles, or perspectives. If it's an answer, an angle or perspective with which a reasonable person might disagree. So think about all of the thesis statements that you've written this semester. I've said, well, they have to be arguable. They can't be facts, because Facts are statements that can be definitely proven using objective data. The statement that is a fact is absolutely valid. In other words, the statement can be pronounced as definitively true or definite to a fact is something that can be definitively true or definitively false. For example, 2 plus 2 is always going to equal 4. And this expression identifies a verifiably true statement or a fact because it can be proved with objective data. When a fact is established, there is no other side and there should be no disagreement. The misunderstanding about facts being inherently good and argument being inherently problematic because it's not a fact leads to this mistaken belief that facts have no place in an argument. This could not be farther from the truth because most arguments are formed by analyzing facts. And facts provide a type of support for an argument. So I don't want you guys to think of facts and argument as the same, nor do I want you guys to think of them as enemies. Instead, they work close together. So in other words, argument, just because if someone is saying something as you cannot mistake what somebody is saying as an argument in an argument as inherently true, as something that can't be defendable, because by its definition, an argument has to be arguable. So anyways, there are two types of arguments. They can be both explicit and implicit. Explicit arguments contain prominent and definable thesis statements and multiple specific proofs to support them. This is common. Explicit arguments are common in academic writing or the types of essays that you guys write. However, implicit arguments, on the other hand, they work by weaving together facts and narratives, logic and emotion, personal experiences, and statistics. Unlike explicit arguments, implicit ones do not have a one-sentence thesis statement, nor do implicit arguments involve evidence of many different kinds to build and convey their point to their audience. However, both use logic and support to create effective arguments. And the thing that I want you guys to keep in mind when looking at implicit arguments is these are the kinds of arguments that you are going to find while doing your research. In some cases, if you're looking at non-scholarly sources like magazine articles, newspaper articles, those types of things are the article that you guys are going to be reading for this week. That is not an explicit argument. It is implicit because it has a point that it is trying to make, but it's not necessarily defined in a thesis statement. You kind of have to read between the lines to get the overall gist of it. Just like the argument that the article that I asked you guys to read by Kathleen Fitzpatrick, that is an implicit argument because you kind of have to read between the lines to see what she's saying. In a nutshell, though, this is what the main takeaway that I want you guys to think about as we move forward. Arguments are substantiated with research. They have evidence and testimony and academic reasoning, but more than an arguable statement or more than an arguable kind of claim, an argument goes on to address the so what question, the implications, and why we should care in the first place. So not only should it be arguable, it's got to address why it matters in the grand scheme of the world. So this week I am asking you all to read the article called Sharenting, or it's not called Sharenting, it's called, it's actually called When Kids Realize Their Whole Life is already online. So it's all about kids Googling themselves and this phrase, sharenting. So I'm asking you all to read that article, and as I said before, it is an implicit argument. So I want you guys to kind of figure out in your groups what's the argument the author is making, how does she support that argument, and what the larger so what, why does it matter in the grand scheme of things. And this is going to require you to do those critical reading skills and your analysis skills of how to read arguments. And this is going to help you moving forward, not only with reading and digesting your own research, but also being able to articulate those arguments as well. So that's what I have for you all for now. And this is only the beginning of our last unit, and hopefully one that you all will enjoy.